Hey, folks, welcome to the BeyondTheBaselines.com podcast. I'm here with Colin Burns, who was the general manager at the illustrious Winged Foot, 7 U.S. Opens. That's an amazing record. 7 U.S. Opens. Welcome, Colin. How are you? And great to have you here.
Ed, thanks for having me. What a thrill it is. It's as you said earlier, we were talking offline. We have so many mutual friends, and so it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, thanks. I was just looking at the history of Winged Foot, 7 U.S. Opens. You were there. I just see that they've announced the 2028 U.S. Open is going to be at Winged Foot. Obviously you were part of those discussions. You saw Bryson DeChambeau in the middle of COVID win it there. I think it was with no one around, right? Kind of an odd tournament. Take us through how you got to Winged Foot, how you dealt with all those U.S. Open tournaments. We want to hear your story. Take us through how you got into club management.
Well, and thank you for asking about sort of the journey, because it really was interesting when you think about it. I look back on it often and think, how did I end up at Winged Foot? I never even considered club management. My family owned a restaurant in Clifton, New Jersey, where Bruce Willis, who's now suffering terribly, worked for 4 years. We had a line of future unemployed actors and actresses that walked down the hill from Montclair State, where Bruce was. And so I grew up in the restaurant business, four brothers, very successful establishment. And we were members at North Jersey, Hackensack, Glen Ridge. My father was an avid golfer, never even considered it. Long story short, I ended up in Atlantic City, where a cousin of mine was doing a lot of casino licensing work. It was brand new. Resorts International had just come online. I end up at the Claridge. I start working with a gentleman named Tony Darrow. Tony Darrow, you would know from Goodfellas, famous scene where Joe Pesci breaks the bottle over his head. Again, I'll try to shorten this up. Tony Darrow was doing a lot of work at Plandome Country Club, this fabulous place where I'm still in touch with all the guys in Manhasset, Long Island. We used to refer to it as the Knights of Columbus with the golf course. It was the greatest group of guys who really knew how to have fun. And so Tony Darrow did a celebrity tournament. One day he calls me up. I worked in Atlantic City with him for 4 days. There's a club job available at a place called Plandome. I said, Tony, I never even thought about it. And at 28 years old, I was hired as the general manager at Plandome Country Club. And Ed, it was the best first job you could ever have. When I tell you, it was joyous. They loved the club. Wall Street was booming.
What year was this? What year? Give us a year.
I got there in 1987.
Okay.
So I was there for 4.5 years. And fortunately, I'd made some contacts within the club community, some of them at Winged Foot Golf Club. And so somebody told me about the Winged Foot job was available. I applied in March of 91. And I finally was able to land the job in October of 91. So it was a long process. I think they were very skeptical of a guy who was so young at the time. I was 32 years old. And it's funny, I remember telling the club president at the time, he expressed some concern about my age. He said, "Aren't you a little young for the job?" And I said, "You know what? This is not a permanent condition." I said, if you give me enough time, I won't be that young. And so anyway, it was just a fabulous 31 years. You mentioned the majors that were held while I was there. So the 1997 PGA Championship, 2006 U.S. Open, and the 2020 U.S. Open, the four-ball championship, and then the 2004 U.S. Amateur and the 2016 four-ball championship. And each one of them was so unique. Each one of them had different demands. And naturally, 2020 will be remembered for the U.S. Open without any spectators. So imagine we had planned 5 years, worked very hard at getting the logistics right, making sure the member experience is exactly what we wanted it to be. We had the logistics, I think, down pat. I mean, we were really very prepared. And then March 13th, we were on a call. COVID was happening. I mean, the epicenter was just 4 miles away in New Rochelle, right across from Montreal.
Yep.
And so we made a call at that point to not start building the tents, because we knew we would end up basically with a ghost city of tents and dead turf. And so we pulled the plug on it. And then we went back to the governor's office and continued to submit plans that we thought would be acceptable. So, and we had our eye on the memorial. We wanted to see what they were doing. We were talking indirectly with the folks at Augusta National, wanting to know where they were going to schedule the Masters. And so it was like this puzzle we were trying to put together, but we didn't know exactly where all the pieces were. And eventually we got the pieces together, and we were offered the September date, and we took it immediately. I think we would have taken a January date if it was offered. I mean, we wanted to host that US Open.
Right. It's a special time. As you were just talking about that, I remember how golf to me on the TV changed because you could see the courses, you could see the design, right? There's DeChambeau coming up the 18th. You could see the clubhouse. Normally you have tents. I mean, you can see parts of the clubhouse, but you could see the whole course as it was designed to be seen. Did that make tell us what you thought about that?
That's so fascinating. The calls that we were receiving from around the world, friends who were in everywhere from South Africa to Japan, wherever it was, saying, "Oh my gosh, we never realized how beautiful the club." People who had not been there, people who had only seen it on television, and for us, it was really, it was a magnificent presentation. NBC naturally did a great job, but being able to view the clubhouse, the grounds, the design, the A.W. Tillinghast, designs where
exactly
the shape of the holes, you could see the greens properly. But what's interesting, that sort of had, it had a direct impact on future US Open hosts who said to me, and some of them, the Shinnecocks and others, they said, "Oh, we want one of those." Well, one of those is okay, except financially, it doesn't quite work out as well as when you have spectators. But it really did. It showcased the club like never before since that first Open, perhaps in 29, when there were no tents.
And speaking about the history of golf at Winged Foot, I did a little research before I got online with you, and your head golf pro won the Masters in 1948. I wanted to tell our listeners how rare that would be. I mean, I forget his name, but we had a gentleman at the Masters who was a teaching pro who got pretty far, I think, this year. But to have your golf pro at Winged Foot win the Masters in 1948 and then host a U.S. Open without spectators in 2020, it was like going back in history, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, we were, and by the way, it would have been nice to have some people, right? But we just couldn't. That was the mandate from the governor's office, and we accepted it. We had 450 member volunteers, and it was very strict, Ed. The COVID protocols at that point were at their very height.
That's right.
We had to set up a testing center over by in Westchester County, so we had to at Rye Playland. So we had to have a testing center offsite. Everyone who was going to be on property had to get that initial test, and then other persons had to be tested on a daily basis. Inside the clubhouse, which was really interesting, was that there was no caddies, no managers, no family. So there were maybe a dozen employees and all the players. This gorgeous, clubhouse, 600 lockers, and so there we were having breakfast with Adam Scott, and sitting having lunch with Matt Fitzpatrick, because there were only a handful of us that were permitted in the clubhouse. We were being tested regularly, and so the whole thing is really very surreal. But I think one of the lessons, I was at the National Club Association at a conference 2 Mondays ago, and one of the things we talked about was so what was that? So what was the underlying message of moving from June to September? Right. I mean, it was much more than scheduling. It was about cooperation. It really was about teamwork. When you think about us, the USJ, all the vendors involved, having to unwind refunding 45,000 tickets, refunding all the member tickets, the hotel rooms, the parking lots, and all of it being done in such good spirit. And there was never a time where we prioritized golf over the safety and frankly, in terms of context, what was going on around us. I mean, the ambulances were going nonstop. You're watching the news every night. You're seeing these horrific scenes of hospitals and refrigerated 18-wheelers and body bags. And you're thinking, you know what? Okay, let's remember, it's just golf. And so with that in mind, we worked very cooperatively with the USGA, John Bodenhammer, who's still with the USGA, thankfully. And it all worked out.
Golf kept us sane. Watching those tournaments because we could be outside. Tennis really stopped, but golf continued for the most part, and it kept us sane. You were part of that, and it was a special U.S. Open. We'll never forget it. Never.
Well, thank you. It's funny. That was one of the motivating factors is that we kept saying, and this may sound a little bit, I don't know, sort of faux patriotic, but it's not meant to be. We really felt that America needed these outdoor sports, right? We needed the NFL to resume. We needed golf to continue. And that's one of the things, if you're an industry insider, I think you really appreciated the value that golf brought, not just watching, but playing during that COVID period. And when you think about it, I mean, the sanity that it brought to people, the mental health that it brought to people.
Right.
We were as busy as we've ever been. I mean, families, it's funny, we turned the terrace into what looked almost like a drive up, like a McDonald's of sorts. You'd come to one window, you had to stay outside. And so you'd come up to one window at the grill room, you get drinks, another window, you got food. But we were constantly evolving, changing. Communications became, and that's why Caroline Asuma, who hopefully we'll get to at some point, John,
We will.
our dear friend and colleague at Wakabuck, we became experts at communication. It was every day. It was texting. It was the private Instagram accounts. It was videos. We started doing these homemade videos
Right.
that the members absolutely loved. I mean, I'd never gotten responses like that because we had the protocols were changing quickly. What's going on with the Open? What's going on with the club itself? And that's the key, right? You're still running a club. So, you have a US Open over here, and then you have a club that you're trying to run and doing all that with COVID protocols, constantly changing.
Hey, you bring up John Asuma. We'll talk briefly about John. I grew up at Wakabuck. John's been there 30, 32, 34. I don't want to say how many years. You look at the other GMs in your area, Guy D'Ambrosio and Stanwich. And for example, I work for Bill Roman up at Edgartown Yacht Club. You guys are all over 30 to 35 years. And you were at Winged Foot for 31. I look at the jobs board now at CMA and I see three big clubs. I see, the Yale Club in New York City, GM. I see the director of food and beverage at Cherokee Town and Country Club. And I see the director up at Ausable, that beautiful club up in the Adirondacks. Has it changed? I mean, are we going to see GMs for the next 30 years? Are people staying? Is it a generational shift, or are people just moving on faster? What do you think?
Such a good question. I don't know if we'll ever see, and there's such a long list of people. There's Kevin Vitale, there's Nick Sidorkis. I go down the list of people, Bob Casara over at Waikagill. I mean, the deep commitment that we made to the industry. We all took it very, very personally, and we became very attached to our clubs. And it wasn't sort of the thing. Once you had a job like a Wingfoot or a Congressional or wherever, Baltusrol, you didn't leave those jobs, and you didn't leave them for a few reasons. One was that you really became, you hope that you'd become part of the culture, part of the family. And each year, especially at the big clubs, brings a new challenge, right? People say, how did you last? Well, it was 31 years wasn't hard when you throw in 3 major championships, 2 other championships, $100 million in capital projects, and go down the list of things. So my job was always evolving. That's such a great question. Will people like myself stay at clubs, for 31 years? I think one of the reasons why they won't, Ed, it's definitely generational. And I think frankly, guys, men and women in this industry recognize that when you make a move every 10 years or so, you increase your compensation, and that's just a fact. And so that's one of those reasons why people may move more frequently, recognizing that there's not as much talent as there used to be out there. You think about all the people like myself who were raised in either the hospitality, hotel, resort industry. A lot of people are not going into that industry, as we've seen with the shortages for staffing at all kinds of levels. And so I could see this. I can see people changing jobs more frequently in the future.
I think you're right. I have to say I think it's a generational thing where people not so much more about the compensation. I don't know if I hate to say this, but I don't know if we as employees have the same um loyalty long term as maybe you and I have had. Um and members feel that, I won't say too much, but there's been a time where I've been pulled away from a job recently, and a couple members came up and said, well, long gone are the days where the director of tennis or the director of golf stayed for 25 years.
Mhm.
And you know, those members know where you have been and where I've been, and hoped that we would be there longer. Do you think it? How can I put this? Do you think it could change back, or do you think it will get faster and faster, and that you will see GMs moving on a bit more than the membership would like?
Well, I think unfortunately it probably will continue. Maybe not. Look, here's some context. I mean, there was a period when the expectancy for a club manager, GM, was 2.5 or 3 years. So I think that's been extended, which is really good news. And that was a function, by the way, probably of poor governance, poor search process.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I don't know if that was necessarily, as a result of managers moving on per se because they were looking for other opportunities. And I mean, I remember seeing the statistics from CMAA several years ago, and I saw it was 2.5 or 3 years. I said, "Boy, it's like being in the NFL. I mean, your life expectancy is really short." But I just don't, to your point, and I just don't know if there's that true sense of loyalty, community that we felt. I mean, there was, I never missed going to a funeral mass. I never missed going to a funeral, repast at the club or some other place. And those things were very near and dear to me. Seeing people, seeing the cycle of their lives, seeing their children born and then grandchildren and weddings, and that was all. And maybe it's just being sentimental and being so enamored with the hospitality industry that I just found myself just in love with where I was.
You bring up a point there, and I'd like to ask you, as a GM for 31 years, you ran these major tournaments, and I saw Catanzit Club, which is up in Massachusetts, where
Oh, yeah.
I'm up in the summer. Wonderful club, top 100 courses in the country. They had a situation where they had, I guess it was the U.S. Senior Amateur, and the course had to close. And I heard things at the country club this year where the members were disgruntled because the U.S. Open closed the course. How do you multitask when you're running a big, or not running, but getting ready to host a major tournament like that? How do you, as a GM, multitask the membership, because they're the people paying for that annual right to play on that golf course, multitask and member service them, and then also deal with the USGA or the Royal and Ancient, whoever those associations are that you have to deal with? How do you do that?
Well, I think, Ed, one of the keys is never forgetting that the member experience is what it's all about. I would force myself to leave the office because I never felt comfortable being away from being, quote, on the floor, right? I wanted to be at that front door. I wanted to greet guests, members. I wanted to walk the grill room, walk the locker room. That was my, that was my MO. And the same rule, I think, applies to hosting a US Open. When we developed for 2020, we developed, the 4 pillars of success for the US Open. One of them was the member experience, because without the member experience being exceptional, odds are you may not host another US Open, because as great a venue as Wingfoot is. And so the other 4 pillars were, obviously, let me get to them: the player experience, the fan experience, or the patrons, as they call them at our revered Augusta National,
Mm-hmm.
and the community experience. And so we had set it up so that we had people basically in charge of those particular pillars of success. And we were deeply committed to making sure that the member experience during the U.S. Open was as good as it is on a daily basis. Now, I think the key to all of this, and again, I spoke about this at the National Club Association conference, is transparent, accurate, timely communication. Right? You have to tell people, the members, what to expect. Here's what's going to happen. And by the way, here's why we're hosting a US Open. Right? This isn't just we're doing this to do it. Here's why we're doing it. In Winged Foot's case, it was because the club committed in 1929, the youngest club to ever host a US Open, by the way. Right? The club opens in 23, it gets the invite in 26, hosts it in 29. And just as an aside, I've seen that contract. And it was, I don't think it would have taken an entire page, maybe half a page. And then and it's funny, I use that as sort of a juxtapositioning to what you get now when you're hosting, a contract and when you're hosting a major event, and it's remarkably different. But I think that the member experience is in a sense controlled by a high level of communication. The more, again, it has to be accurate. You need to answer questions before they're asked. I mean, this is, if I could coach any young managers, people who are newer in the industry, communicate and almost like in the Godfather, bad news, you need to deliver the bad news quickly. And that's how you need to treat boards and members. If there's something that's not, you think, to their satisfaction, you need to let them know, and you need to let them know quickly. And you need to explain things. I think too often people don't want to explain things. Here's why we're hosting an Open. Here's the benefits to the club. Here's the benefit to the USJ and their mission in the promotion of the game of golf. And so that was our approach. And look, there is the members have to give up the club for a week, 2 weeks. By the way, it's almost never as long as they say that it is. In terms of how much they lost.
Right. And they say lost. I've lost a summer. They'll say that.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit not as sympathetic perhaps, because they benefit from it. And when they join a club like Winged Foot, and Marion, Oakmont, go down the list, Baltusrol, you're going to host a major championship at some point. That's one of the reasons why you join. So you can't begrudge the fact that the club is hosting one, right, when in fact that's the club you joined.
I don't know if you remember Paul Deegan. He's a good friend of mine, but Paul, I was going to call him up saying, "Hey, you got tickets? I'm coming up," but it didn't happen. 2020.
What a great guy, great family.
The Smiths, and he's married to a Smith, and we go way back. But hey, now you're on the other side. Now you're at GGA Partners, and you're running executive searches for general managers. Why is it that searches for GMs, and this is a question I always ask myself, why is it so important that a GM candidate has gone through a clubhouse renovation? You know what I'm getting at. It's always a question like, have you ever done a renovation of a golf course? Have you ever done a renovation of a clubhouse? Why is that such an important criteria for a GM candidate?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure exactly why it is that important. I think that, the reason it comes up, again, questioning whether or not it should rise that level of importance, I think the reason it comes up is you and I both know, there's so much activity going on at clubs. I mean, clubs are just, it's almost like an arms race now in terms of, renovations that are being done. I mean, you look at, Peacock and Lewis and the others, that are out there doing work, whether it's Hart Howerton. I mean, it's just, it's amazing. I think clubs were very concerned pre-COVID, and all of a sudden COVID happened, and it's let's renovate. And so I think boards want a certain comfort level, knowing that from a project management perspective, that they can, keep their eye on the number, that they can understand the budgeting process. I don't think anyone's expecting a new GM to be a project manager, but I think a board needs to be comfortable knowing that they can work with the contractors, understand the budgets, understanding how to manage that budget. So I think that's probably why it comes up, Ed. It's just there's so much going on.
Going back to the search process, because Colin, you're on both sides of the aisle, as they say in politics. What are the biggest mistakes you've seen the search committee has made when they're doing a search for a GM or department head, food and beverage head, which is such an important key revenue part of a country club? What are the top 2 or 3 mistakes you've seen a search committee make?
Well, I think Ed, probably the number one mistake is not understanding cultural fit. And you say you use the term cultural fit, and I guess at some level it could have some type of negative connotation. And when I say it, there's certainly nothing sort of pejorative about it. It's meant that to say that every club has a culture. And I can tell you from experience, we in fact over the years at Wingfoot, and not to go into specifics, but we made some bad hires. And I would say if you needed to narrow it down, it was cultural fit. They were not in tune with the way Wingfoot operates, from sort of a philosophical perspective, from a cultural perspective. Again, meaning the traditions, the etiquette, the values. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake. Now, why is that mistake made? Well, the mistake is made because the search process, and look, for years before professional search companies were as evolved as they are now, house committee would hire somebody. Oh, seemed like a nice guy, and Ed said he's a great guy, and let's go hire him. And I'm hoping now, particularly as I work with GJ, that clubs who we approach appreciate the fact that I've been on both sides, and that I take a very serious approach when it comes to making sure somebody is placed in the right environment. Because you can take somebody who's very qualified and put them in the wrong environment. And you know this as well as I do. Mm-hmm. You put them in the wrong environment and they fail, not because they're not qualified, but because they just weren't a fit for that particular club. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be sussed out during the interview process, is making sure that they're comfortable, making sure they sort of get the club and its values, its traditions, what makes it tick. So I think that would probably be my, number one. Yeah.
The flip side of that is, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, is that the environment of a winged foot, or the environment of a big club that you may be hiring for, they're going to pull from a similar environment, so that the candidate pool tends to get smaller and smaller, and it's more and more difficult to find someone in that small candidate pool. Don't you think? Because if the environment is so important, and I don't know, I think you're dead right that candidates don't fit some environments, and I think search committees don't understand always what they're a part of. They don't understand that this is a wonderful club, or this is a fantastic opportunity for someone, but that candidate pool may get smaller and smaller, and that's a tough road to hoe for a search firm.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, it was funny, we were on the call with a very prominent U.S. club a couple of weeks ago, and we asked the question: would you be willing to consider somebody who has not been in the GMC, or maybe they've been a clubhouse or a club manager at a very big, high-profile club? And it's funny, they actually came back with a positive response. While it wouldn't be their first choice, they would not exclude it. And I think that's part of deepening that talent pool, is maybe looking beyond the people who you would normally look at and say, okay, maybe we'll give. But again, and I understand, as they say in business, right? I mean, you never go wrong with a white shirt, so you don't. It's easy to not make mistakes, but it's also, there's potential out there. And here's the other thing, Ed, that I think that the industry is going to be looking at. You're going to be seeing a lot more women. You're going to be seeing a lot of Latinas in the club management industry. I've worked with some who are absolutely phenomenal, elegant, smart, bilingual. They get it. They've run their households. They have children. They have all of those things that make them a really smart, well-rounded person. And some of them have gone on to some very good jobs. And I think that's the other way of deepening, if you will, that pool, is looking to, the club that would normally, we wouldn't even consider having a female. Well, they're going to consider that now, because I think they have to. And by the way, they should. I mean, that's just a fact, right? I mean, in terms of diversity, and just reality. And so I think that's part of this sort of new age of who's going to be running clubs. I mean, I remember the day when they were all German hoteliers. I'm talking when I was really, starting out. however many years ago that
So you're
was.
saying the GMs of the clubs were all German hoteliers?
They were all
Yep.
hoteliers. They were
Yep.
all, they were, they in those days are long gone. So now what's next? What's next? Or this younger, hopefully female, and culturally diverse.
I always think of hotels and restaurants are in hospitality, and the pool can get bigger there. The other place I always say to my clubs when they come up and say, "Hey, we got to get this pool bigger." Advertising firms, it's always a client. You're always working for a client. That client can call at midnight. You have to answer. It's big money, and so I've done that. I've moved from advertising to the club business. I've seen other people do it. And I think that marketing advertising, it's not hospitality, but you obviously always have a client. And when someone tees off on that first hole, they're a client. They own the company. They're a client of yours as a staff member.
There's no question. There's no. Excuse me.
That's okay.
I was talking to someone the other day about AI, and just, and I'm a big fan of ChatGPT, and I use it just to help guide me a little bit when I'm just thinking out loud about something. And I find it fascinating. But there's certain things that AI will never be able to do, right? And they'll never be able to service that client. They'll never be able to stand at that front door and say, "Ed, how are you? Nice to have you here. It's good to see you." As somebody said to me, the AI can't change your flat tire. It can't fix your plumbing, right? So all these things that are now going to be of even greater value. And one of those things is hospitality. I mean, hospitality makes us as a society better, right? It makes us better human beings. When somebody's standing there smiling and saying, "Ed, nice to have you here. I'm glad you came. Thanks for stopping by." I mean, there's just something about what that does to the soul, right? The way it touches the soul when you're having a meal and somebody comes over and they check on you. There's just something about that that's irreplaceable.
Best directors of golf and the best directors of tennis, and that's my side of this business.
Yeah.
Not so much the GM side, but I've heard Pied Piper, I've heard the Happy Clown,
Yeah.
front and center, personable, whoever it may be. They don't have to be the greatest instructor, but if they entertain you and they treat you as a client and as a member, they're going to go a long way in this business.
And I agree 100%.
Hey, how do we get? I know you have to do this all the time with GGA and searches. How do we? Is there a way we can regulate compensation packages better? I mean, it's different from club to club, department to department head. It's different. If you look at at the salaries of GMs from club to club, they vary so much, and the bonus structure is so different. Can we ever regulate that?
I guess regulation is a loaded word, right? But it's funny. I mean, I've looked at compensation packages. GGA does compensation surveys. I work with club benchmarking quite a bit, and that was what's funny. That was one of the things that at Wingfoot, as we became sort of more sophisticated in terms of governance and just in management, was understanding the marketplace. So a company like GGA doing a compensation survey or a club benchmarking, very helpful to because you don't want I'll put on my sort of the governance hat is you don't want to be paying Colin or Ed way beyond the market, right? Because that's just it's not healthy. And the other thing is you don't want to be that far behind the market where you're not going to attract anyone. And I think one of the things that clubs I think need to look at as well when they're doing compensation is the value of housing, success bonuses, stay bonuses, retention bonuses of some form. I think for years it was always just here's base compensation. Bonuses, by the way, all over the place, right? It could either be put your finger up to the wind and did Ed do a good job this year, or there's some measurable objectives, and even those get a little bit, those can always be
subjective.
They're subjective. They get a little bit sloppy, but I think look. The bottom line in terms of advice is knowing your market, knowing sort of what you need to pay, and the level of responsibility. I mean, there's clearly there's a difference between, and I'm not saying that the manager is any better or worse at a Wingfoot versus a more local club like an Appowamus or a Waikago, but clearly the level of responsibility is much greater. at a bigger club, at a Baltusrol, at a Congressional, at a Wingfoot. And I think clubs just need to do a better job of understanding their market, what they need to pay, what they should pay. And by the way, sometimes it's the director of turf care. We used to call them ground superintendents. Now everyone's a director
Right.
now.
Yeah.
So and is it okay if they get paid more than the GM? Well, in certain cases, they probably should be. I mean, if that's the brand and they're killing themselves 7 days a week. Look, I'm the first one to recognize a guy like Steve Rabideau, who's at Wingfoot now, who absolutely, I mean, there are few people in the country. There's Paul Latshaw, there's junior, there's a few Paul Latshaw seniors, one of the guys I idolized. But those guys deserve every penny that they get. I mean, they don't, they can't take a break. They can't do what, and I can say this because I was, I did it long enough. GM can take a break. We can close the office door for a little bit. We can gather our thoughts. The typical director of golf course operations, the golf course superintendent, they don't get a break.
The grass keeps growing.
Grass keeps growing. Chemical application allowances keep changing, right? What comes off market, what's now regulated. The weather. I mean, think about this year, nine rainy weekends in a row. And so, and by the way, if a GM isn't comfortable with that, I think they really need to look long and hard at themselves, because it shouldn't just be symbolic. Oh, I need to be paid more because. Well, no, that's to me, that's not an answer. You get paid to do your job. Ed gets paid to do his job. And if Ed's job is in some ways more important than my job, then he should be compensated for that.
I have several times educated boards and said, hey, the director of squash. Now, I found something out in the last 3 years running a squash club that squash professionals make a lot more money than tennis pros, and oftentimes make more money than the golf pro. And in many cases, the golf pro or the director of golf is the highest paid employee of a club. And a lot of times the board has difficulty reasoning with that and coming to grips with that. But if you can pitch it as you just did, they'll come around in the end. But it does. They're a little surprised sometimes when they see that final figure.
Yeah. And I understand that, because that's such a traditional mindset, and I think I think one of the mistakes I think clubs generally make is the absence of just good, wholesome, earnest communication. Ed, this is why we're doing this. This is why Colin, as a squash pro, we feel his compensation should be here. It's not a negative reflection on you, as the GM, but this is just the reality that we're a squash club, and that's what makes us. That's our brand, and I think that would take a lot of sting out of somebody either just finding out or being told but not being told why. Right. There's a guy named Alfie Cohen who I met years ago. He's a Harvard Business Review writer. He's published a few books, and he said to me, because I picked him up from the airport and dropped him off, he said, Colin, remember, we engaged him to do an educational seminar. He said, if you remember nothing else, remember that if you want a quality organization, you do things with, not to people. He said, just remember that. And it has stuck. This is 25 years ago. And that has stuck with me. With, not to them.
Hey, it leads me to my next question in a beautiful way. You're one of the best GMs ever. Okay, you've been at Wingfoot 31 years. How do you say no to a member? How do you do it? Do you do it? Do you say, I'm going to find a way to say yes? No. But if a member comes up and it's something you absolutely cannot do, how do you say no? And how do you live with that?
Well, Ed, that's one of the real difficulties, right? So my rule of thumb is I would have somebody else tell them. No, I'm just kidding. Have somebody.
I like that one.
Have somebody who's your junior tell them, and then the member comes back to me and I say, "Oh, Ed didn't know what he was talking about." No, I mean that's one of those. I'm just being silly. I think again, it comes back to being honest with people. If a mistake was made, you need to say, Ed, I made a mistake. We thought this room was available for this particular evening, but it's not. And I apologize. But I was okay with saying no. I didn't want to say no, and I wanted to make sure the staff was fully aware of all the happenings at the club, so mistakes like that wouldn't be made. But the mistakes are made, and sometimes, and that's not quite saying no, but it's recognizing the sort of bad news scenario. But I think, my approach with saying, saying no to a member it was never because I was saying no. I mean, it was because here's the greater good, right?
Right.
I'm insisting on having my daughter's wedding on June 15th, and we want the terrace. And we can't do that. First of all, the board doesn't allow it. Second of all, it's patently unfair for the rest of the membership. And here's how we can try to accommodate you, but I'm sorry, but we can't do that. And so it's tricky, but I think you can't hide from it. I think you need and again, you're not representing your personal feelings, because you'd love to say yes to everyone, but at times, you have to say no to Ed, so that the other 100, 200 people who'd be affected aren't affected by that decision. Never easy, but again, own it, talk about it, be upfront. And look, I'll never forget at Plan Dome, 1987, 88, whenever it was, we had two. I had just gotten there, so it was 87. There were two weddings booked on the same day. And I'm still in touch with one of the families, and it was really upsetting. I thought I'd lost my job. The previous manager had booked something. He didn't put it in the books. I went and booked something. I got a call from the mother of one of the brides from the halfway house, screaming, "You ruined my life." And I put down the phone and I went, "Dear God, what just happened?" But the lesson from that was, we managed because people were nice. They were not mean-spirited. They understood a mistake was made. We owned the whole thing. We communicated to the entire membership about how we're going to do one in the afternoon, one in the evening.
So you did two on the same day.
Did two on the same day. It was one of those things that would be a chapter in a book.
I was going to ask you if you're talking to the family that didn't get the wedding date or did get the wedding date.
But it is. But we dealt with it as a team, and that's what made Plan Dome, again, certainly. So I'd say the quintessential local club, where 90% of the members live within a mile, a very homogeneous environment. They understood that a mistake was made, and we had to close the entire day. We had to close for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We had all hands. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget, the grounds crew, guys from the grounds crew came in, helped us move in between. I mean, because we needed to make this happen. And when you do things, you do things collectively like that, there's something really special about it. And I remember the woman, it's funny. The mother of the bride was getting out of the car, and I'm standing there and I had my tuxedo on. We had polished the floors. We'd rented a grand piano, put it in the lobby. I had somebody playing it. We brought in these huge ferns and palms because I wanted it to just be, this was for the evening wedding. And I heard her saying to her husband, "If I see one piece of paper on the ground," she was tough. And I'm standing there, and I'm a little bit thinner than I am now. And I'm in my tuxedo. And she looked up, she looked around, she saw the piano, she saw the palms, she saw the polished, waxed floor. And she said, "I love you." And I said, "Thank you." And that was it.
And it was hospitality, folks.
That was it, man. It was special. Yep.
You've got so much going on in the air. You've got like 5 different emails going. So tell us, GGA is a new appointment for you. You're helping them out with searches. But tell me about this Apogee Club in Hobe Sound, Florida. Hobe Sound's special to me because I worked at Jupiter Island Club, and I saw this online. And please explain 3 courses. The designers sound amazing. What's going on down there?
It is destined to be one of the great golf destinations, I think, in the country, perhaps in the world. It's, imagine a stream song, private, on steroids. It is 1,200 acres, 3 golf courses, 2 clubhouses, up to I think 40 villas, a world-class ownership team. Michael Pascucci, the owner of Sabonic, along with Steve Ross from related companies, the Miami Dolphins.
Yep.
They came together. They bought this spectacular piece of property. And it's not your typical Florida piece of property, Ed. It was never a cow farm or pasture. It has beautiful topography. There's thousands of oaks. Blue stem was planted everywhere because the prior owner was a hunter, and he hunted pheasants. At one point, he had 40 dogs on the property. And so between the pines, the oaks, the blue stem that was planted everywhere, and the fact that it abuts the St. Lucie River, literally 4.5 million gallons. Listen, all you superintendents, 4.5 million gallons free water a day. to charge the 150 acres of lakes that we've created.
Wow.
It's just, and then you have Gil Hance, Jim Wagner, Mike Davis, Tom Fazio, and then Kyle Phillips, three completely distinct golf courses. The facility has been, the land has been engineered beyond belief. I mean, we've gone through some rainstorms already, not collecting any water. It drains beautifully. All the vertical buildings are being designed by Hart Howerton, Meyer Davis Interior Designs. I mean, the villas are 3,800 square feet. And so
That's not
Steve,
a villa. A villa is
no,
supposed to be
really,
small and European.
it's bigger than my house. Um, and so it's the team, the ownership. So Michael Pascucci, the owner of Sabonic, is, and one of the founders of the Bears Club, is deeply involved in the golf course side of things. Steve Ross and his team from Related, all the vertical buildings. And so it's not just there's one good element. Every element is just world class. I've been representing them. I was actually named as the COO right after leaving Wingfoot, but I just, with family being here in the Northeast, I just couldn't move down there. And so my wife and I decided we're going to stay here. And so Mr. Pascucci and the ownership team was very agreeable. So now I'm acting as a senior advisor, basically doing membership admissions, and just spreading the word about Apogee. It's a very special place. I hope when you're down that way you come visit, because it's really it's. I mean, imagine the practice facility is 45 acres. The hitting area, right? So 8 hitting bays, deck to deck, it's 400 yards.
Smokes, that's big.
So even you could hit driver.
I wish, maybe in the day. My driver goes about 180 now, getting older.
Yeah, I know.
So it's in Hobe Sound, and in there's a lot of great courses down there. Medalist is there,
MacArthur,
the Jupiter Hills.
yep.
How do you get the competition? How are you going to compete with those guys? I mean, those guys have been there for a while. Is it just so great? Do you have to look at the price point for membership? How's that going to work?
Well, it's a combination of things. First of all, the demand down there is absolutely through the roof. There are Emerald Dunes, Old Palm. They have long waiting lists, 5 and 6 years. Their price point is basically the same as it is at Apogee. But we have such a collection of amenities that it's almost, it's hard to deny the fact that this is going to be the superior offering down there. And so I think that's it. If the ownership group didn't believe in West Palm, which they do. I mean, Steve Ross is attracting Goldman Sachs, fabulous retailers. All into that Rosemary Square area, which is just phenomenal. If you haven't been down there, that's where his headquarters is in West Palm. It's a remarkable area. They're building out schools, the Pine School, which is sort of like a Hackley, Brunswick. That they're helping. They're working with the Pine School to build another school in that area. So there's a lot going on there that indicates that West Palm. And that area is going to continue growing for some time. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people are now staying full time. So that's the other thing. So you just add it all up, right? There's wait lists of 5 and 6 years. The price point is comparable. We've spoken to realtors, Ed, who have said we've had clients not buy homes because they couldn't join a club.
Correct. Yeah.
And so it all adds up, and we've been very blessed. The first tranche of members of the membership basically closed out in 10 months.
Wow. You can see, I mean, I grew up in Jupiter. I didn't grow up. I went to 5th grade there, 5th and 6th grade. My parents had a house there. And then I worked in Hobe Sound. And you can see, Jupiter to Quest is kind of the line of development. And then you get into Martin County and there's not a lot there. But you guys are banking on more being there. And I think you're right. I think you can see how Florida's growing. It's just growing north. It's going north.
It's north and west, and it's look. There's nothing left in Palm Beach County.
No space.
And yes, there are other clubs being built in that area, but we are fortunately, because the relationship both Mr. Ross and Mr. Pascucci have with Martin County, they're good citizens. They do everything they're going to say. The approval process has been really expeditious. I think one of the other things, Ed, is that it's not a housing project, so there's no homes for sale. So
Right.
that's a difference, right? So Martin County looks at it and they say, well, you're not increasing the population per se, so we don't have to worry about infrastructure, sewers, roads, all those things,
Yeah,
schools.
they're very careful about Bridge Road, Martin County. I know that because of the history there. They're very careful.
Yeah.
Um,
So anyway, so we're doing everything, whether it's moving the gopher tortoises, whether it's maintaining the native wetlands. I mean, this is all something that as an ownership group they've taken very seriously, and I think Martin County appreciates that.
I will be down there. One of my favorite places is called Harry and the Natives. It's on the corner of Route
Oh,
One and the bridge, the
I've been
Bridge
there.
Road.
I've been there.
Everyone knows Harry and the Natives.
Yeah. I went to,
Hey,
to
go
where's
ahead.
it? Hog Snapper?
Hog
That's
Snapper, yeah, Hog Snapper,
Tequesta.
yeah.
Wow.
Tequesta, that place is great.
I love
And
Tequesta.
Tequesta is a cute little town. It hasn't been, Palm Beach County has high rises,
Yeah.
whereas where I am in Indian River County, we don't. We're three stories is as high as we can go, 34 feet, I think. But
Yeah.
Martin County doesn't really have much yet,
Yeah.
and I think it could be really special if they're careful. If obviously they love you guys because you're not building 500, 700 homes,
Okay.
um, but I think they can be really special because Hobe Sound, the beach is really already built up. It's all single family dwellings, so they can't really do much there. And I think it could be a really special place.
Yeah. Well, it's
Um,
going to be. You'll see when you come down and visit. It's special.
I can't wait, and I can't wait to get up to Connecticut. Now, where are you in Connecticut up there?
I'm right in Greenwich. We're in Glenville, which we refer to affectionately as the cheap seats. So it's not far from Portchester. It's the first exit as you're going up, as you're
Up
going up the Barrett.
up the
Yeah.
Merritt Parkway. Well, I'm
Yeah.
gonna come up there and I'm gonna get John Asuma and you
Do
and
it.
me and maybe Matt Asuma, who's now friends of mine because he saw me in the industry. So I will make sure that we
Let's
meet
do that,
somewhere in
please.
Greenwich. We
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thank you
Cool.
so much, Colin, for being here and your time and relating to us all that you did at Wingfoot, all that you did for the U.S. Open, and all that you're doing now. It's been a fantastic
Thank you, Ed.
podcast episode. I'm really thankful for you being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in Connecticut.
I'll be there. Don't worry.
Bye. Bye, Ed.
Bye.